Dr. Joel Rothman is a distinguished professor of biology at UC Santa Barbara. What's up, dudes? He is the director of the university's Center for Aging and Longevity Studies, through which he researches the possibility of increasing human lifespan.
Oh my God.
He is also lead scientist on NASA's Project Starlight. Dude! A mission to send small spacecraft carrying microorganisms to other stars. His work investigates the origins of life and the potentials for its expansion. What's your favorite movie about space?
What's the best movie about space that's ever been made?
The Right Stuff.
No. I mean, the best. 2001: Space Odyssey. I mean, think about that movie. It is breathtaking. It's unbelievable what he pulled off.
Yeah, because it still looks modern even by
It looks kind of
contemporary
modern,
standards.
but there was no digital anything, zero, right? That was the first science fiction film that wasn't a joke.
What do you think the ending means?
It's sort of about renewal and reaching a higher state. So first it was kind of like the ape-like humans. They got to a higher state where they were using weapons with bones and stuff. Then the next state, we're able to explore the cosmos. And now this last state being some higher way of thinking and maybe even controlling the solar system. I've heard that as an interpretation.
How did you get into life extension?
I got older and started thinking a lot about it.
Did you have some kind of like ailment?
No, I didn't have an ailment. No, I started becoming very aware of it about 30 years ago when the first discoveries were coming out that's changing a single gene in a single animal. These little worms, which are microscopic animals, we grow them in our lab all the time, called C. elegans. We have probably millions, I think, but we have thousands of individual tubes, each that are genetically different. When you were still, an infant, some of those I stuck in the freezer in Cambridge, England, and I mentioned those flew across the ocean, and then we drove them in a U-Haul truck to here, and we still have them in here. And so they're in liquid nitrogen. And within here, then, are these thousands of individual tubes, thousands of tubes. So see those boxes there? Each box has 100-something individual tubes with thousands of worms each in each of them. So we have millions of animals in there. Some of these guys have been in frozen like this for 35 years.
Do you think they have dreams?
No, because they're frozen. They can't dream or think or anything. But if we trained them, if they had memories, if we trained them back before you were born, right, and stuck them in here and thought them out, they'd remember where they were. But they'd just feel like, oh, here I am again.
So you're saying there was a single gene that we were able to change the expression of that extended the life of a worm. What was the gene?
The gene is, it's called DAF2. It is the insulin-like growth factor receptor, it's called. So it's related to insulin signaling. Humans, who lived 100 years, as it turns out, the disproportionate number of centurions have the same change in the human equivalent of that gene, in fact. So it is relevant not only from worms, but also in humans. So it is a gene that is preserved across essentially all animals. And it seems, in every animal you look at, it has the same effect. It extends lifespan.
So do you think we're capable at this moment in time in doing that for humans?
We are not capable of doing that at the moment, although we might be, and it's currently being tested. There are a bunch of candidate drugs for extending lifespan that work great in worms, in fruit flies, in mice. If they work across that wide a range, all those animals, then the chance that they're going to work in humans is extremely high. Because from my viewpoint, a mouse and a human are the same thing. So this is what we could do. We send them in space in that condition. They're completely in suspended animation. Nothing happens at all. And we believe, based on what PJ said, 40,000 years, I suspect if you kept this thing filled with liquid nitrogen, could be hundreds of thousands, perhaps a million years. You can keep something in there and then take them out a million years later. So the idea, the cryopreservation of humans or whatever, it's not completely as crazy as it sounds. It's a lot harder with a human than a worm, but it's certainly possible.
Are there any parallel drugs that people are already taking that have those kind of benefits?
Yes. So the top candidates right now, rapamycin is number one, I would say. That's being tested in humans right now. Metformin is the other one. And those guys are repurposed drugs. That's the most attractive ones right now, especially for somebody my age who might be thinking about wanting to do this, is to get our repurposed drugs. Drugs that we already know the dangers of them. These things have been used for decades. They're FDA approved. Now they're just being used to extend our lifespan.
I've heard from athletes, though, that even though it extends your life, metformin can diminish your peak performance a bit. Is there any truth to that?
That I don't know.
You're not hanging out with enough weightlifters?
I do not hang out with weightlifters, no. You can tell. Look at me.
What is it about protecting your insulin that allows your life to go longer?
It's related to the fact that you may have heard that if you are at the edge of starvation, so every animal that's been looked at,
Yeah.
and now humans, this is called caloric restriction. If you're at the edge of starvation and you do that for a substantial period of time, your rate of aging is decreased. You and all these animals live longer.
So as like a proper scientist, how do you feel now that like things like intermittent fasting have become so popular in like the bro science sphere?
I guess I'm a bro science guy. Again, there's so much information that still needs to come in. Intermittent fasting is looking very promising. It's certainly very promising for weight loss. But the reality is, and that's what my experience has been, it's probably just that you're skipping a meal.
Right, it's just
Yeah,
the
I mean, that's a
caloric
big part of it.
restriction. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to do with your metabolism changing based off the time parameters.
Well, there probably is a metabolic component, but how much of it is that is not clear.
Nice.
But I'm intermittently
I'm doing
fasting
it.
now. Are you doing it?
Yeah, what's your time window?
Usually 1 in the afternoon to no later than 8 in the evening.
So you're doing like the
So
16-8 thing?
7, yeah, exactly. 16-8, 16-8, 17. Yeah. And you know what? I had a 83-inch waist not too long ago, so it's worked pretty well. You know, I'm down to 34 and I'm going smaller soon. I'm just kidding.
Are there any ethical quandaries surrounding life extension?
That is one of the big challenges that I face in being the director of the Center for Aging and Longevity Studies. Every night I come home, my wife says, "Why are you doing this? There are already too many people on the planet." So about 150 years ago, technological changes were made on the planet that dramatically increased life expectancy. Life expectancy 100 years ago was about half of what it is now. It's doubled that. The most important technology probably that contributed to that great increase in life expectancy was what? What would you guess? 150 years ago.
Was it sanitation?
Yes, sewers. That had more impact, my understanding, on life expectancy than any other technology.
Right.
Sewers. Piping away your poop.
Waste.
Right? Because now you could get water that wasn't tainted anymore. What that did was dramatically decreased infant mortality. Now, nutrition, agriculture, the Green Revolution, and of course modern medicine dramatically changed infant mortality. And the biggest impact on life expectancy was the fact that infant mortality wasn't happening anymore. It's very rare, thank goodness. In the US, it's still there, but it's very rare. The problem with intervening with babies who are dying is that babies
Turn into
produce
adults.
more babies. They turn into adults and they produce more babies. And in fact, that results in exponential growth. If you have 3 kids, like I did, those 3 kids, if they have 3 kids, you get exponential
Hockey
growth,
stick.
right? Then you go from 1 billion people on the planet to 8 billion in 100 years. That's an enormous.
That's sick.
So, because of that, we now are suffering the consequences of climate change. Had the population stayed at 1 billion, I don't think we'd have the problems we do. We would spew out 1/8 as much carbon dioxide. I think the planet could handle that. We would not be in the trouble we're in. So, if you think about that from an ethical standpoint, you realize, if you could go back 150 years, would you have voted to not install sewers, right?
No, I'm for extending
sewers?
life and for the massive reproduction of humans.
And you like sewers also.
Yeah, I think it's in line with the idea that we're like a virus and it's our job to just keep going.
Okay, now let's say you had a drug. You have people before you that have dreadful disease, horrible disease of various types. You have a way to cure that. You have a way to cure it or ameliorate it, right? Is it ethical to hold that back?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that's what we're in with lifespan extension. We are going to, whether our center does it or not, we're going to discover interventions, drugs, maybe gene therapies, other treatments that will extend lifespan. By doing so, not lifespan per se, that's not our drive, by the way, it's to extend health span, the period of life in which we're vigorous, youthful, and disease-free. What we'd like to achieve is what's called compression of mortality. So we live healthy much longer and then bang, gone.
Die quicker.
Yeah, instead of having this long, slow
Decline.
dive, right? And as these interventions are going to appear, is it ethical to hold back on them? So I would say it's unethical. That's certainly, and in fact, the number 6 or 7 tenet of the modern Hippocratic Oath says, whenever possible, use prevention, because prevention is always superior to cure. This is about preventing age-related diseases, right? Now the problem is, because I think it's ethical to cure cancer, and I think it's ethical to intervene in cardiovascular disease, and if we get a cure or at least an effective treatment in Alzheimer's, I think it's ethical to use that treatment. It's the same thing. If we extend health span, we are essentially diminishing these diseases, right? Especially if we get compression of mortality, we could almost, really reduce the number of these
I'm curious,
diseases.
who's pushing back against you on these things?
A lot of people bring this up all the time. We had a debate. We hosted a debate at the university. I decided early on, we just had our grand opening launch in April. And by June, I had a debate of a scientist and an ethicist on both sides of the question. Should we extend healthy lifespan? Exactly the question you're asking. And we had the debate in front of a live audience. And then the audience voted before and after which way. And actually my side lost. The room was filled with young people, students. And the students heard, the last argument they heard is, do you really want Supreme Court justices who are in their 150s or 200s? Isn't housing a big enough a problem already?
Right, so they painted a dystopian picture well enough that you lost the vote.
Yeah,
because people are dispirited about human nature in general, so they kind of want us to die.
Yeah, I guess I would say.
But so what is that the main argument that people have against extending life?
The income disparity is a big one too. So Donald Trump can live to 500, but the people who keep my building clean for me can't.
So do you have some kind of plan for like universal basic life extension?
I'm not an economist, but market forces always drive down prices. Billionaires, whether you like them or not, will have access to it first, of course, just like everything else.
No, totally.
Everything else, but that disparity is going to fade. So we have people living to 200 years. Then society is going to adapt to that in the following way. Eventually, at first it's going to be it's very disruptive. It's a revolution. When we've reached a stable level like that, people are going to start having babies in their 60s, right? They're going to be educated into their 30s or 40s, possibly, right? I can imagine that, right? They're going to have opportunities for many careers, because their first career, if they did it right, they've accumulated enough wealth to sustain maybe re-education or going out and doing what they want to do, and they have another opportunity to develop another career.
It's a beautiful outlook. So you're saying like things like parenting will be better because you'll have more experienced parents.
That was another one I was going to bring up.
Art will be better because they'll have more aggregate experience.
Yep.
So everything you see improving based off our longer lives.
No, I mean, certainly there are downsides for sure. For example, because if it's a cult of personality and that personality stays around and they maintain popularity, which may not be good for the society overall,
What do you think the process will be for life extension?
I can't put one answer to that, but I can tell you about some possibilities.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so the simplest one, drugs. We talked about rapamycin. Metformin. There will be lots and lots of other drugs, other compounds that are going to do that.
So a daily
I think
pill.
a cocktail is going to be necessary. The problem is aging is a very complex disease. You can't just hit one place.
It's probably unique to every person too,
And
right?
that's another thing, is we'll need AI, we'll need machine learning to match the genome with the
Which 7 pills this person needs
exactly,
versus
that's
the 5 that
exactly
this
right.
person
But we'll need like the 7, let's say, and we'll need to match the genome. That's also an important thing. That's the easiest one because it's just drug development. Another one that's more challenging, but it's coming, I think it will be possible, is gene therapy. That would be, we are infected with a virus that's inactivated. The virus doesn't make us sick at all. All the virus does, a virus is just a delivery packet for DNA. That's all it is, or nucleic acid. And so you could get a virus that injects in your cells a changed gene that extends your lifespan using the information we have for these little animals.
So that'll be like a yearly shot or something like that.
It could be a one-shot deal.
Oh, okay, so you get it when you're a baby, and it's in there.
This is a long way off, but
And
you can imagine this.
will it be time sensitive? Like, will you have to get it while you're a baby, or will it be just as effective into adulthood?
I can't answer any of that because the answer is yes and no depending on what we develop.
Amazing.
It is almost like a tool where aging is accelerated.
Oh.
And so
You're making these guys like Jack, the Robin Williams movie where he ages at 4 times the rate of your average human.
yeah.
So can you guys jack a human?
No, we don't want to, right?
But you could.
No, we wouldn't.
Theoretically, though.
No.
Well, because ethically you wouldn't, but you have the capacity, if you were amoral, to do it.
Yeah.
Dude.
That's why any kind of gene manipulation in humans has to be heavily regulated.
Right. Could you, at a time, ever make it portable where it's like in a shot, and then I could just stab someone and jack them?
I don't think so.
Okay, it's more complicated
It's
than
a
that.
lot more complicated than that. What has to happen is you need those edits to happen in every cell of the body, so it has to be done in the embryo very early. So then whatever edits you make are then inherited by all the cells.
Right. So if you jack someone, you have to jack it into your jizz.
Yeah. That's still not the embryo. That's just the sperm.
So I can't do it, period.
Nah.
My wife's mother died of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Sure. And I was studying this process called programmed cell suicide, which underlies this ALS and lots of other neurodegenerative diseases. And it every time I wasn't focusing on my work and trying to push the edge in our work that was relevant to this, it bugged me because I thought maybe I could cure it, right? So yeah, this hangs over my head.
You feel a personal responsibility.
Yeah. Now, fortunately, most of my my wife is, my closest relative. She's my age. We got to go through it together. But my parents are gone, and so my children, I don't have to worry about. At least I don't have to worry about losing them. I hope to goodness, but certainly not because of aging.
Do you think death gives meaning to life?
Yeah. So what would happen if I lived? If I knew I were immortal, would I feel like my life is meaningless? I personally would not feel that way, but I've heard a lot of people say that. Yes, in a way, it would take away meaning, and it would take away the sense, certainly the sense of urgency of doing something. It would perhaps, and people have argued this, take away the drive to accomplish something in a way, because you just have forever to accomplish it. So I think, from that standpoint, I think death would be knowing that we're mortal creatures has a real impact on the way we think about these. And there's psychologists we work with in the center I run who actually deal with exactly that issue. Personally, I can't tell because I'm not, I know I'm mortal, but I personally just love living so much. I'm not sure it would dull my experience.
I totally agree. And I think it'd be nice to be able to have a century that you dedicate towards work and a century that you dedicate towards leisure.
You go back and forth,
those
right?
You'd have the opportunity to change life completely.
Sure.
And then also, if we were immortal, suicide would go way up.
If we were immortal, possibly.
Because people would have to decide their own time to leave.
Sure, as long as you can leave, then what's wrong with immortality? Except the world population.
Yeah, but would immortality change our relationship to suicide?
Are you fertile?
Yeah, I have 2 kids.
Okay, so where did those cells come from?
Where did it come from?
Yeah, came from your cells.
Yeah.
And your cells were whatever age you were when you sired those kids, right? Mm-hmm. Where did those cells come from before that? If you kept going back, cells divide to 2 and then they divide again. Where did they go back? Where did they go to?
My dad?
Yeah, and where did that go back?
His dad.
That was immortal. That's a line of cells that went on immortally. That is a human line of cells that is immortal. We have immortality in us in that regard. All that means is that it's certainly biologically tenable that if we can figure out how that rebooting occurs when an egg is fertilized, how those cells are rebooted to be young again, why can't that be applied to any of our cells? And I think it's certainly
that's like
feasible.
the monologue from Buried Child, the Sam Shepard play, where he's trying to drive away from his family of origin and he looks in the rearview mirror and his face becomes the face of everyone who came before him, his dad and his grandfather. And he says, every breath marked him. It marked him forever.
Awesome. I was thinking exactly that.
But what do you mean by that, though, that you're unlocking the immortality? Does that mean that, I'm now my dad and my kids?
No, it means that something happened when that egg was fertilized that created your kids to refresh, to reboot the cell. It's no longer an old cell, it's a brand new cell, right?
So you're going to have sex on every person to cleanse them?
I don't think that would be the right strategy, but you can use what happens in sex more properly during fertilization and the creation of a fresh egg.
So what happens in that process?
If you want, you can look at worm sex downstairs. They set that up for you.
Why worms?
So these guys were originally picked up as an experimental system a long time ago because you can do so much with them. You can do so much. You can understand their genetics very quickly and ask questions very deeply. You can get huge numbers of these. You can take one of these hermaphrodites and wait 10 days on a Petri plate like you'll see in the lab. How many do you think you'll have after 10 days? One of these?
1,000.
You will have 30 million.
What?
Yeah, so they grow extremely fast. So you can get a lot of them. And
They
you can do a
reproduce
lot with
that
it.
quickly?
Yes.
Does worm sex feel good for both sides?
I hope so. Right?
Me too. And do they intermingle with each other? Is there incest?
The males and the hermaphrodites mate with each other. I guess you'd call it incest because they're all genetically, they're siblings for sure. Oh, totally. Completely incestuous.
So is there any kind of Habsburg thing where they start having the same defects?
No.
Like they slobber?
No, they don't slobber.
So what are you doing with Project Starlight?
What really drives me is understanding the limits of survival with 2 parameters, time and space. So I've just focused on time. Aging, longevity, developmental biology, that's all about the interface between time on living systems. That's what aging is. Space is the other one. What are the limits of survival in space? I heard that my colleague Philip Lubin, who I think you've spoken to, had developed a way of sending small spacecraft to the next star system, the Alpha Centauri star system. So these are little tiny craft. They call them star chips because they're just little tiny. They're like the size of a compact disc or something like that. And I approached him and said, "Have you thought about putting life on site on these things? Because we'd like to figure out what happens to life as it passes through interstellar space." And he was very confused by this, but I explained that we work on these little animals that we can get on board these things. We have a possibility in your lifetime, maybe not mine, but probably in your lifetime, where we can actually do this experiment. To get to the next star, if you're relying on NASA or Elon Musk, will take how long?
10 years.
50 to 100,000.
50 to 100,000?
Yes, that's the fastest we can get. To build the fastest rocket you can build, it's going to be
The Falcon.
50,000 to 100,000 years, right? So we ain't going to see this,
No.
right? Phil has designed a laser propulsion system. So that means you can get to the next star in 20 years. In your lifetime, you might see this happen.
And can we even see it when it's going? Like physically?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably see it's very small too, but it will be sending signals back. It uses the same laser array that you use to send up the thing can receive the signal coming back from them.
How do you decide which species gets sent on the spaceship?
Okay, so we decide this because what we need, how are you going to get an animal on board this thing, right? It has to be very small. It has to have very cheap and simple life support. It has to be able to withstand massive gravitational force, because when these things are accelerated, they get something like 100,000 times G. That is, it's as if we weigh 100,000 times as much. We die at 10 G, right? So 100,000 times. They have to withstand that, and they have to be able to be put in suspended animation. The little worms that I talked about, they can be put in suspended. They're tiny. They fulfill all those criteria. We can freeze them, and I'll show you when.
But do they have the life expectancy that's necessary for the trip?
They're frozen. So their life expectancy is virtually infinite as long as they're frozen.
What is cryptobiosis?
So that's the other organism. So with worms, we can stick them, freeze them, and take them out anytime we want and study lots of stuff along the way. Cryptobiosis is the process that this other microscopic creature goes through. These tardigrades, these little guys, right? These things. These guys can undergo lots of different types of cryptobiosis.
That's the other guy?
That's the other guy, right? These are cute as hell, by the way. They like their tummies rubbed too. But these guys have 8 legs. These are microscopic. They're called water bears. They look kind of like bears. And these guys can dry out completely. That's a form of cryptobiosis. It's actually called anhydrobiosis, removing all the water. In that dry form, you can get a bunch of these little guys, and if you go down to the lab, you'll see these crawling around. You can dry them out and make a powder. So it's like a dry powder of an animal. And you can take that powder and stick it into the vacuum of space for weeks, and then bring them back in, give them water, and they walk off. This animal can survive the vacuum of space in that dry form. Now, so what we can do is we can put those on the chip without any water, and then we have a little delivery system, add a drop of water.
Wait, so they can be outside in space?
They can be outside in space, just exposed to the vacuum of space. An animal. Watching a movie, they kind of look like a dog. They go around, move their heads around, move their legs.
They have a sense of smell?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, for sure.
Whoa.
That's how they find their food.
What a sick
Or
animal.
things that they don't like. It's pretty sick animals. These are really sick animals.
What is your hope with Project Starlight?
My hope as a scientist is just that I will be able to take my laptop computer and watch these guys do their behavior or develop whatever it is I want to look at while they're at the next star. And there it is, live. Now, it's not live because it takes 4 years for the light to come back here. So it's always going to be 4 years later. But still, I'm watching the life happen that we made get there near the next star system. That's pretty cool. And then we can ask how healthy they are. My guess is they're going to be fine, but we don't know.
So if they can live there, it could potentially mean that we could live there?
That's the reason to do it. Who were the very first astronauts?
The Russians.
Okay.
Monkeys.
Yes, even before that, it was fruit flies and mice, right? Those were the first things set up. We didn't want to send humans up in orbit until we knew it was okay. These are the...
Spam in a can.
Yeah, exactly. These are the guys, these are the monkeys, these are the dogs, etc., to send out first. If we're ever going to go into interstellar distances, we better know it's okay for life. We can even test whether it affects memories.
What do you think about NASA's mission to send an orbiter to Europa on Jupiter?
The most exciting thing that I can think of that could happen in my life is discovery of life somewhere else that evolved independently of us.
And if they do find life in Europa's ocean, how does that affect your work?
There's another experiment in evolution that's as rich with the questions that we have.
Well, is it because all the ingredients and the components would be different, so it'd be all brand new?
We don't know that, but that's possible.
But that's what excites you about it.
Sure. How do you get life with other components, for example? Or how do you get life? You know, it's a second example of it. If it's really independent, it tells us, it teaches us.
And you could be the
history.
first one there.
We have to be very careful, by the way, not to contaminate the other planets. That's a big problem. NASA really worries about this. Planetary protection.
So you think we need to worry about contaminating other planets?
Yes, absolutely. We already did it with the moon. We've really crapped it up, and we've contaminated Mars too.
So just with all the space shrapnel we have?
Yeah, and you could say, oh well, the craft were sterilized. Da, da, da. You can't sterilize. The rocket goes through the atmosphere, which has living stuff in it, right? And then when you release whatever the
So it's like colonizers
probe
bringing
is.
smallpox to native populations?
Yeah, effectively. I think we've probably brought microorganisms to Mars, even though we didn't want to.
What could be the negative consequences of that?
You could wipe out the native species of things.
What is the panspermia hypothesis?
The panspermia hypothesis is that life, and I don't really like the idea because it just chases the whole question back, but life sprung up elsewhere. It traversed the cosmos and landed in some form, bacterial cells or something, on the Earth 3.7 billion years ago or so, whenever life started, roughly that period. And then evolution occurred from those seeds that were created. All that does is chase back the question, where did life really start then? But that's the notion of panspermia. This experiment kind of tests whether at least panspermia is in any way conceivable, right?
Right, because if these organisms can exist on other star systems, it
Right.
means it could have started there and then come to us.
Yeah, and I think they would be able to, but that's, you know.
But you don't think that validates the hypothesis?
It supports the hypothesis. It doesn't prove it. I don't know if it will. The only way we'll ever be able to prove it, we will be able to prove that panspermia exists. We might not know which direction. But if we find life elsewhere, and it is based on the same molecules that our life is, and has, most importantly, the same genetic code. So we're all coded with a specific code. You could easily change the code differently depending on evolution. If they have the same genetic code, that the life on that planet and this planet came from the same source.
Henry Kissinger lived to be 100. What do you think he was doing right?
I don't think he probably did anything right. I think he just got lucky. I think his genes were right, and I don't he looked a little heavy to me.
What do you consider old?
I don't like to use the word. Advanced age.
Who do you think is the hottest advanced age person?
Okay, so I'm heterosexual, so I'm going to have to say a female, right?
It's up to you.
I wish Audrey Hepburn were still alive, but she's not. I would have said her, maybe.
Are you into MILFs?
I would not say I'm into them, no.
But you're
I-
married to one.
Well, that is true. She's a mother,
Exactly.
and I enjoy her
Yeah.
as a person, and in lots of ways, too.
If Alexander the Great was still alive, do you think he'd do TikToks about being bisexual?
Yeah, probably now, in the current culture, I would think so.
That's cool though, because I don't think
Sure.
it would hurt his ability to be a conqueror.
No, of course not.
But I'm progressive.
Yeah, well, me too. But yeah, he'd probably be open about it. And
But I've also kissed guys.
well, I have too. I kissed my sons, my father.
Bro, come on. You made me excited for the future, and I'm really grateful that intelligent, compassionate people like you are working on this stuff.
Oh, me? Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were talking to me.
Is it hard
thank
for you
you.
to be sincere?
Yes.